Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cricket Unfiltered. I'm Menners, and look, unlike the English cricket team, I have not snubbed my opponent. I'm actually having a post-series catch-up, so I'm thrilled to be joined by Jack Hope from the UK-based cricket podcast. Jack, welcome back. How are you?
Hi, Menners. Yeah, it's great to be back. I'm looking forward to reviewing a pretty fantastic series overall.
Yes, I didn't lock the door on you or make up fake excuses like Ben Stokes about why we're not catching up. And then returning to the show, my old friend Gav Joshi, cricket commentator extraordinaire. Gav, how are you?
I'm good, Minutes. I'm finally on better sleep cycle after those 5 weeks.
Oh, it was brutal for us, Jack. I tell you what. The one thing about committing to doing daily wraps of the Ashes is you really have to watch it, and that meant, days and days and days of 3 or 4 hours sleep.
Yeah, what time were you recording your shows? 4 a.m. most of the time?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes we would do them 4 a.m, or we would get like 3 or 4 hours sleep and then get up and do them straight away. Morning coffee. But yeah, it was brutal. But anyway, enough of me whinging about sleep. Let's get into it because so much to talk about. There's been a lot of discussion since the series ended. I mean, I'll start with you, Jack, as you're, the special guest from the UK. You have to say 2-2 in the end was a very, very fair result. England got really lucky at the end there. Australia just went off the boil after the second test, and England did some great stuff, made some great changes. But in the end, 2-2 is a pretty fair shake.
I don't know if I completely agree on that. I think I would say
I was so surprised.
I think I would say it isn't an unfair result, and I think bigger picture, look across those 5 tests. I think you can say that Australia weren't undeserving of retaining the Ashes. I think they did play some good cricket. I think they're basically the only team in the world that would have been able to stand up to England at all. And for 4 of the tests, they did, and they won 2 of them. And let's be honest, after tea on the 5th day, were probably favourites to win at the Oval as well, and could have taken the whole thing 3-1. However, looming over all of that is obviously what happened in the 4th test, where there was decisive cricket, I think is the best way of putting it, where one team did dominate the other, and that team doing the domination was England. And for that to be the match that doesn't produce the result.
You don't even know England's going to win that match. I mean, Cam Green and Mitch Marsh might have scored hundreds, and it was a famous victory. I mean, and yeah.
Look, anything could have happened, couldn't it? But, what was happening was that England were handing out a bit of a thrashing to Australia. And for that result to be nulled, it is a disappointment for England. And I think if you look at the sort of stats across the series as well, England's batters outperformed Australia by an average of about 4 runs, 5 runs, depending on how you slice the data. And I think that shows that England probably over the 5 matches were the better team. Having said all of that, original point, I don't think Australia were undeserving of retaining the Ashes, and I think they played some really good cricket. And if you have 4 matches decided by under 3 wickets or under 50 runs, it's anyone's game. And for it to end 2-2, it also, it's not too unfair on England, I don't think. Like it was a close series.
Where do you sit, Gav?
Jack, I think it might have been 5-0 if England finally managed to take all their catches. Menace, you might agree to this. I know you don't like agreeing, but that's it. I mean, if England held on to all their catches, I think they end up being convincing winners. I sort of agree with Jack. I think England will be more disappointed. You just look at the first test match. In that second innings at Edgbaston, I think England took it slightly more casual in that second innings. You look at someone like a Joe Root's dismissal. There's a really good example. At Lords, I mean, 1 for 180 odd, and then you throw it away like that. And I think there's from the whispers I've heard, a bit of a talk in the dressing room, just to almost, I won't say go away from Bazball, but just play a little bit smartly. And in saying that, I think Australia will be disappointed with Leeds. I mean, here they were, I think 7 for 140 odd, and Mark Wood comes out swinging. So I actually think England probably will be more disappointed overall, because I think England could have won that series, maybe whether that's 3-1 or whether that's 3-2, whether that's 2-1, I'm not sure. But I think England will be more disappointed because they had better opportunities to win. I think England missed more moments than Australia, I would say that. Because let's be fair, at the Oval, yes, Australia's looking to win. But look, it's easy to say on paper, but more than 350, it hasn't been done much in Test cricket. So I think the odds were always against Australia, especially after the ball was changed, Menace. And I'll let you come off the long run in this one.
I mean, I want to get onto the ball. I mean, we need to dedicate a whole inquiry into that. I mean, I think the podcast should just delve into what actually happened out there. But I think a lot of, journalists here, Jack, and a lot of, pundits have likened it to sort of a heavyweight boxing match. And if you were scoring points, you'd probably have England ahead on points at the end of the Test series. And I think you can sort of, there's merit to that. Johnny Bairstow was really slow getting going with the gloves. And it's what you said, Gav. If Bairstow had a better start to the series with the gloves, some of those matches could have gone the other way. But I do think Australia really dropped the ball after Lords. I think, what happened with Johnny Bairstow really rattled Cummins. They went ultra defensive. I think Andrew McDonald, as coach, has to take a lot of the blame. Tactics in the field were mystifying at times. The batters went to sleep. I mean, if you said to me Steve Smith would average under 40 in an away Ashes series, I'd have fallen off my chair. I mean, I think Australia had an absolute shocker after Lords. And, you have to say World Test Championship, Edgbaston, Lords, 3 in a row. That's a great run for a touring Australian side. But then I think they just went on the defensive. And I guess Jack, that's exactly what Bazball wants you to do.
I kind of agree with that. To be honest, I think had they stuck to the game plan, which seemed to be a little bit more front foot oriented. Look, I mean, they were never trying to score at 5 and over or anything like that, but they had some big counter-attacking innings in those first 2 tests and scored at a reasonable rate. And in the field, they put sweepers out early, but I didn't actually think that was a bad tactic. I thought that sort of worked reasonably well. Later in the series, you ended up with sort of 7 men on the boundary, and the game the third day at the Oval, to be specific, it just drifted away from Australia. I thought England scored risk-free runs. They scored 400 risk-free runs basically in a day. I think the thing that really shocked me though was the batting, the way that changed, and I think the 2 instances that I was basically perplexed and thought Australia was scared of England. Late on day 1 at Old Trafford, when Alex Carey came out to bat, and with the last 20 overs of the new ball, Australia scored 42 runs. Really just tried to kill the game. And it was pretty obvious at that moment in time that Australia had decided that the best way to get a result from this was to hope that the rain came on day 4 and that they could, if they could just bat out enough time on day 1, the draw would come into the game, which I think is just the wrong way in all circumstances, to be honest, of playing an innings on the first ever Test match. Agreed. And then at the Oval, on the second morning, that Labuschagne and Khawaja partnership, bizarre cricket, really, really bizarre cricket. And
I think that was Labuschagne. I mean, Marnus just got stuck.
Yeah, got stuck. I think it was a tactic. He's got 8 runs off 82 balls, or 9 runs off 82 balls. I don't see how a player that good. And I'm not saying here he has to go out and score 70 in the morning or something like that. But if he walks off with 30 runs, it just changes the tempo. It means that England have to set different fields later in the day. It means the ball's got a little bit more wear into it. It gives Ben Stokes something to think about. Instead, what happened was England were able to just put it on a spot for pretty much the entire day and let the conditions do the hard work. And dreadful,
Jack,
basically.
Jack talked about the defense. Australia had prepared the Ashes to play in that manner. They were never going to take Bazball on, and fair enough. I mean, you look at the secret of Bazball, and you look at people like Crawley and Duckett and Harry Brook. Full credit, because Brendan McCullum, as the story goes, has walked into the interview with the ECB. It's on the lines of you've got attacking players, and we want to play an attacking brand of cricket. Now, Australia trying to play basketball would have been ridiculous. I think they played the right way. But the matter, I think, is for the bowlers, and we saw the frustration with likes of Josh Hazelwood and sometimes even Pat Cummins, that how easily a good ball was still scored off because you'll be blocked straight into cover and there'll be a single. And that's Pat Cummins and Josh Hazelwood's big strength to keep them. So, yes, it might have started off well with the winning the first two test matches. And that's where I go back to that moment at Lord's. I think England was slightly more diligent about the way they went about their business, that if the field is spread out, go it still, 4 or 5 runs and over, and that would still work. And it proved that way as well. I think Australia, yes, there was only plan A. It's to spread the field back. How to get England out was, I just don't feel like there was a bit of a plan B. Now, a lot of that plan B was also affected the fact that Nathan Lyon wasn't there, because trying to hit Nathan Lyon out of the attack is not one of the easy parts. So I think the minute you lost Nathan Lyon, rather than you alluded to Johnny Bairstow incident, the minute Nathan Lyon was gone, you felt that Australia was always going to swim against the tide in this whole test series.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Lyon was a big miss. But just going back to the batting, I do think that England is a bit obsessed with run rates. And, that Marnus Labuschagne, that's a terrible example. He just got stuck. But, Khawaja's tactic the whole series was clearly he's not going to nibble outside off stump. I'm going to make you bowl at me. And if that means I'm going to play out mains, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to wait for you to bowl straight. And then I'm going to turn you away on the onside. And if you overpitch, I'll drive you, but I'm going to leave everything else alone. But I think the real crime is, Smith, Head, and Labuschagne got a ton of starts throughout the series. What did they average? They all averaged in the mid-30s. Well, that is the biggest crime in Test cricket. If you get to 20...
Sorry, man, it's even David Warner. I mean, I think he had 6 starts of more than 20s. I mean, so don't leave him out.
I know. I think that we just I'm surprised he got to 200 runs. So.
Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think but then on the bowling, I mean, this is where you see, and you're right, Gav. I mean, Jack, you must have been surprised that Cummins and Hazelwood, the way they bowled. Cummins took his wickets at 37, Hazelwood over 30. It wasn't just the tactics. They weren't bowling that well. They didn't seem to be able to bowl on one side of the wicket. And I just think they didn't have clear plans, and they weren't patient enough, and they just started spraying the ball around.
I think there's an element of that, and I think that's probably particularly true for Hazelwood. I thought that Cummins actually overbowled himself earlier in the series and was tired by the end of the match. Do you remember? I think it was the second innings at Edgbaston where him and Lyon bowled sort of 50 of the 70 overs or something, nuts like that. And at that point in time, everyone was saying, Australia's tactic, using more balls up, that will come back to hurt England later on. And what ended up happening was that England rotated through their bowlers, brought Wood and Wokes in, and the miles in the legs of Ollie Robinson were irrelevant in the third, fourth, and fifth test. I think the miles in the legs of Cummins, who is from an English point of view the scary bowler. When Cummins gets the ball, he's the one who you really don't want to see. You don't want to see them bowling full stop. You don't want to see him bowling well. Even more so. And I think he neutralised his own threat to some extent with some of his earlier spells in the series. Now he's the captain, and there are questions about whether you could have rotated him out or whether he could have bowled less. I mean, if he had bowled less at Edgbaston, who's to say that Australia wouldn't have lost that match? That probably would have meant more from Scott Boland, wouldn't it? And he wasn't exactly Mr. Magic in this series. So
no 6 for 7.
He was between a rock and a hard place to some extent. But I do think the workload told on Cummins towards the end of the series, and he wasn't as good.
And the mental toll of being captain. Go on, Gav.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that let's not forget that the World Test Championship test match. I mean, Australia's played to play 1 extra test. Yes, England did play against Ireland, but I think England fast bowlers only bowled about 70-odd overs in that test match. It might have been 80, while Australia's bowled about 150 or 160 against India. And I think that was a big pivotal moment in terms of fatigue setting in, and rightfully, Pat Cummins, played all those matches, and you could see it. And yes, I reckon the Johnny Bairstow incident, they might not agree to it. It clearly had a bit of an effect in terms of fatigue with number of people. Even walking down the streets, I think Australians were getting a bit hassled. And how are we going to? Because another part of captaincy, of course, is that question was always going to be raised in the press conference. So the team had to, support it. Pat Cummins was constantly had to back his decision and the team's decision, and all that would have played on his mind. And I think I agree with Jack. Just going back to that, patience of the Australian bowlers, and normally Hazlewood coming so accustomed to bowling that fourth or fifth stump line. I think what England did really well was they shuffled across and hit them through mid-wicket. We saw Crawley do it, we saw Brook do it, we saw Root do it. And the fact was that made almost the Australian bowlers bowl a lot straighter, even on a normal. It was almost they had a feeling that England was coming to get them, so they were looking for a tactic to bowl at the stumps. And England, I think it was a stat somewhere where England had scored nearly 50% of their runs through the leg side, which is quite strange because generally the Australian bowlers bowl more in that channel. And I think because they went away from that tactic, also affected not just their mindset, but their ability to take wickets, which was so important because we just didn't see the quality of the Australian attack, especially, like Jack said, in the last 2 or 3 test matches.
Yeah, and I think any Ashes series, but especially this one, would have tested any captain. But I think it's a lot to ask Pat Cummins to be the fast bowler, and you could just see at times the game sped up on him. And yeah, it was, I just think it's, we struggled with our bowling plans because you're right, they were hitting through mid-wicket, Gav, but there was no one there half the time. They could just, knock it into the gap and take an easy single. I think they needed to be a bit smarter. And I think at times bowling like a 7th stump line and being very defensive would have actually been okay. So yeah, a big miss from Australia. All right, I want to ask Jack something, but first, this episode is brought to you by NordVPN. Now, there's a lot of great reasons to have a VPN at the moment. One of them is if you're traveling, you're on holiday. I know it's summer in Europe. You can keep up with the cricket by using a VPN to change your virtual location, and then you can use your cricket viewing app. Also, if you want to maintain your privacy, and I'm sure Jack and Gav are both surfing on the internet and want to keep some of those websites they're visiting private. So NordVPN is absolutely going to help you, and Cricket Unfiltered can offer you an exclusive deal. If you go to nordvpn.com/cricket unfiltered, you get a huge discount by getting 4 months free if you sign up for 2 years, and it's a 30-day money-back guarantee. So that's nordvpn.com/cricket unfiltered. So you won't miss any more cricket. And the link is in the show notes. All right. So Jack, I want to ask you, I listened to the cricket podcast after the Johnny Bairstow incident, and you described it as a dick move. Now, do you want to walk back those comments now, or do you still stand by them?
No, I'd basically say that is the case. It was a bit of a dickhead thing to do. Is it out by the letter of the law? Yeah, it is. But it's. I mean, I made another joke on Twitter after England refused to go for beers with the Australians, and I likened their response at at Lords to how they would react if they spilt someone's pint, i.e., that they wouldn't buy they wouldn't buy a pint for the person whose pint they had spilled because there's no actual law that says they need to do that. And I think that is kind of what I'm getting at when I say dick move. I think.
What did you think on that last day at the Oval when Stokes knew he dropped the catch, and then throwing the spirit of cricket out the window, he sent the review up to the umpires?
So I don't think that really. Well, I don't think these are actually analogous because that happened during a passage of cricket that sort of we see, and I think in that situation, he was basically convinced to go for the review by Bairstow, who wasn't looking when the ball was dropped. And so I think what had happened in the 15 seconds, you've got to remember this as well. They've got 15 seconds to decide this. I think that Stokes wasn't really sure of the rule and thought that the England players were telling him that it had been given not out because the umpire thought that Smith hadn't hit the ball, and so that's why they went for the review. I mean, clearly he dropped it, and clearly he shouldn't have reviewed it. I think it was partly because of a misinterpretation of the rules, i.e. he didn't really know, and partly out of sheer embarrassment that he didn't want to front up to his teammates and say, "I've dropped that one, boys." I don't think it's a spirit of cricket thing. I mean, like, it's not really a spirit of cricket thing. I think that obfuscates and obscures the actual angle. I mean, I think with the Bairstow stumping, Bairstow clearly thinks that the over has been called, and the umpires are like handing stuff out. The square leg umpires walking off.
They're not though.
They are. And I mean, he's walked off to such an extent that you can Photoshop the whole of the Abbey Road Beatles front cover between him and the stumps at full size and fit it in. I mean, like, he's miles away, and the stumps get knocked down. Like, is it out? Was overcalled? No. So you can, it is, if you want to appeal, out. But don't be surprised if everyone thinks you're a bit of a dickhead for doing that. And I think the other thing that really surprised me from an Australia point of view, look, if you want to be that team and you want to claim that wicket, sure, go ahead, like, own it, be that team. But you can't be Mr. Nice Guy at the same time. And I think that really got to a few of the Australians. I mean, speaking secondhand here, but Cameron Green and Alex Carey specifically really they were really surprised at the reaction that they got from the English crowds after that point in the series. And I think if you want to if you want to be Mr. Nice Guy, if you want to be, and everyone says this about Alex Carey, and I think it probably is true. He is one of the nicest guys in cricket. If that is your image and that's how you want to portray yourself, don't stump somebody when they're, completely oblivious to what's happening in the game, and don't do that and then think you're going to get nice treatment. Like, they're not. Yes, there's some cognitive dissonance going on there.
I agree with Jack. I mean, the incident, I mean, perfectly legal. I have no problems with it. My issue is if you've done something and then the crowd and the media and the opposition are into you, don't whinge about it. Because that's probably going against what most people believe is within the spirit of the game and so forth. I have no problems. And I actually credit Pat Cummins for the fact that, he stuck by it and he went on and saying, we still think we'll do it again. And good on him for that. I like that as a captain. And because you've got the full support, your captain's got your backing to do all those. But then to go out and say, the behavior at Lords, and I'm not, by no circumstances feel that abuse should be allowed anywhere at a cricket ground or any sporting ground. But chances are sport is very emotionally driven and people are going to get attached from it, detached from it, from a particular incident. And I just felt that for Australia to say that, look, we are sort of, I can't believe the stick that we're copying here. I think that was something that they probably had to reconsider, because if the same thing happened in Australia, I think it would be the same old story. Like, we would be upset. And it's just in any sporting field. So that's what surprised me. I have no problems with Pat Cummins doing it. And I actually applaud him for the fact that he stuck up for his teammates, and teammates are all okay with it. Look, to be honest, Meadows, watching that incident live, my gut feeling as soon as it happened is I wasn't a fan of it. And I immediately in my mind, the thought was, this is going to cost Australia the Ashes. I just felt it's going to.
Wow.
Yep.
Almost
at that
did.
point. Yep. Well, I mean, it probably cost them winning the Ashes. Because I just felt.
Well, yeah. But what you? Yeah. Go on.
No. It did. The incidents didn't sit well with me. As you know, I'm a cricket coach, and next morning when I went out and most of the kids said no. And my big incident is Australia's better than that. Look, with respect to some of the minor countries out there, but if a minor country does it, then I'm like, okay, well, they probably can't get a wicket, so that's their way of getting somebody out, right? But you're Australia, you've got great bowlers. You don't need to do that. You're better than that, and I think that's why it didn't sit well with me.
Yeah, one thing you can't argue with is the English fans had an absolute shocker. Like they had a mare the whole series. I mean, if they were the English fans, chanting Rolf Harris stuff at Edgbaston, claiming a moral victory, then the behaviour of the fans at Lords was just disgraceful. But the abuse after Bairstow is no surprise. I mean, the English fans have been abusing Smith and Warner for 5 years. I mean, it goes on everywhere. There's stories of fans chasing the bus in 2019 and yelling stuff, and a lot of personal abuse. And I don't think the Bairstow thing obviously turned it up, but the footage of the English crowds right throughout the series was embarrassing. I mean, it was just an absolute shocker. And I know some of it happens in Australia. I mean, it is part of crowds, but the English fans take it to an extra level. Like they turn it up 5 times. Well, offensive songs, offensive chants, abuse on every street corner. I mean, it's pretty bad, unfortunately. I mean, it's way worse than a run out because a wicket keeper doesn't know to stay in his crease, just wanders out.
I think that is, aside from the English crowds for a second, we can get onto that. I think Australia were actually sort of shocked by how the English cricket team reacted to the Bairstow stumping. Now, I don't want to exonerate Bairstow here. I do think it was stupid for him to walk off, and like he did learn from it and stayed in his crease later in the series.
Carey takes the ball and throws it straight away. Like you can't deny that. So I think there's nothing sneaky about it. There's nothing sneaky about it.
But here's what I thought.
This is the victim complex in 2023. This is the generation. Blame everybody else. Don't take personal responsibility.
I think Australia thought that the English cricket team might see their angle and be like, yeah, fair enough, it was a wicket. But what actually happened was Stuart Broad relentlessly took the piss for 2 hours. And then after the game, Ben Stokes said we wouldn't have done that. And McCullum said we wouldn't have done that. And it left them a little bit isolated. I think they were expecting their fellow pros to rally round and say, that's the laws of the game, we'll play on. But instead, England said, no, we're committed to what we're doing. And we think, they didn't literally use my phrase, but they basically insinuated that they thought it was a dickhead thing to do. And I actually think that's where the Australians. Well, I mean, I think that's where the Australians were, probably felt the pressure. Was that England hung them out to dry a little bit. Now with the crowds. English cricket crowds
indefensible. They're football crowds. I mean, I hear it from English.
They are,
fans.
Yeah.
They're footballified, and I know there's some great English cricket fans. I've said a lot of nasty things over the Ashes, and there's a lot of great English cricket fans. The trumpeter from the Barmy Army is a massive fan of this podcast, Simon Finch. So I know there's some good ones, but I also think, like in Australia, there's some bad ones.
Well, I think that's true, and I think there is an attitude at some of the grounds that and some of the areas of the grounds that is sort of okay to do whatever you want. And this is an issue across sport in England, that there are areas of pretty much any stadium you go to where the crowd like to think that they're effectively lawless and they can effectively get away with whatever they want. So it's something culturally that I think England is trying to confront slowly. And hopefully it's something that they'll overcome. But at the same time, you don't want to lose outright the boisterousness of the crowd, and defining exactly where the line is between having a laugh at Steve Smith for sandpaper, which I think is probably okay, and then bringing Rolf Harris into the conversation, which is probably not okay, isn't necessarily easy. And it isn't necessarily easy to do that when you're talking about 5,000 people singing a chant at the same time and isolating who might have started that and so on.
England has a history. England has a history of this, so it's nothing new. And they do get that football tribe. They're good at writing songs, and it can get pretty vicious out there. I think more so than in Australia. The grounds are smaller. They're on top of each other. There's a lot more a lot of drinking going on. I mean,
there is a lot of drinking.
That's what struck me when I went to the Pakistan v England T20 World Cup final last year at the MCG. The Pakistani fans with their families having a great time, and you go to the English fans, they're like drinking pints, like blasted, stumbling all over the place. And sure, I'm not knocking people having a good time, but sometimes it can be quite ugly.
This is the other side of the culture of going to English Test cricket, especially, I think, over here, is that for probably 50% of the crowd, it is an extended drinking session, which starts about 10:30 when you get a pint from as the bar opens, and will carry on probably until about 11 o'clock in the evening after a meal out and another session in the pub.
The curry.
Yeah, and I think obviously with alcohol comes a lack of inhibition, and maybe some of those people are not making the smartest decisions that they could.
I know. All right, Gav. Now I know you've got to go, so I want to get into some cricket stuff, and I want to just talk a bit about some great performances. But I want to let you go. Just before I let you go, Gav, tell me what's your kind of one favorite memory from this Ashes series? A positive way to end your appearance.
I think, to be honest, watching Mark Wood bowl. I
love it.
95 miles an hour. It actually makes. We have thousands of cricketers come through. Not many can bowl at 95 miles an hour that consistently. And it was late at night, Menace, but it even made us almost stand up, at that hour and watch it with the eyeballs almost popping out, because it was exciting. There's nothing like it. As Australians, we just feel like one of the best spells we've watched over Test series has been Mitchell Johnson blowing the Poms away in 20. We know we all constantly refer to it. And while this wasn't pretty much for 5 Tests, maybe just for 1 or maybe 2, it was fascinating to watch. I was very impressed by Harry Brook as well. That's my English side of things. I just think he's the next sort of modern. I'm not going to call him, a great batsman yet, but you see the next generation coming through, and who's got a decent enough defense. He's got all sorts of attack, plays the authentic shots. I'm waiting for Australia to produce a cricketer like that. Cam Green, maybe. When is he going to get his opportunities? But on that
note, Is this one memory? Because that was the question.
Yes, it is. Yeah, absolutely. Watching Harry Brook bat, yeah, absolutely it was, because we'll come back. He might make 10,000 runs in Test cricket, and we'll remember that first Ashes Test series that he had, and we'll go, "Yep, we all thought of that when he played that." Hopefully, he's not that successful in the next Ashes, but there is a lot to like about him. Doesn't matter which team you play for. I'm a cricket lover, Menace, and I really love the way Harry Brook went about his business.
All right, terrific stuff, Gav. Well, thanks for joining Jack and I. Jack and I are going to bring this home. I know you've got to go out and have fun on this Saturday night, so I'll catch up with you soon. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Meadows. Thanks, Jack.
Cheers, Gav.
All right, that was Gav Joshi. All right, so Jack, I want to get into some of the nitty gritty of the stats and some of the great performances, but I think I'd love to touch on Stuart Broad. I thought that was just such a wonderful way to go out of Test cricket, and he's a bit of a pantomime villain for Australians, but for him to be performing at his best still, to take those last 2 wickets, to hit his last ball for 6. He couldn't have picked a more perfect time to go out, and I just wonder why he's got his old mate Jimmy Anderson sort of still plugging away, why he didn't sort of sense the opportunity to walk off together and make it that would have been a real grand occasion.
Well, there's a lot in there, isn't there? Like, firstly,
yes,
Broad going out the way he did, that was peak Stuart Broad. Almost too good to be true, to be honest, to hit your last ball for 6 and then take the 2 wickets that wrap up an Ashes Test match, with the sort of the weather improving. You had those long shadows at the Oval, then everyone celebrates on the pitch, his family's there, and in a way as well, he wasn't necessarily the instigator of England fighting back into the game. Moeen Ali had a lot to do with that. But some of Broad's best performances, I think, have been when the game's been in the balance, or maybe England have been the slight underdogs, and then he's come in and produced a spell and changed things. And I think the whole passage of the evening session there, building up to the Broad crescendo, was a fantastic way to send him off. And what a cricketer over the years. He might not have been the best seam bowler of his generation, but in terms of entertainment value and what he brought to the game, and particularly the Ashes, I think almost peerless. He'll go down as a legend of the game. Just for the sort of the crazy spells, the 2 Test hat tricks, the edging the ball and not walking when it gets hit to slip. What was it? Was it the Brisbane Courier Mail who called him the 27-year-old English medium pacer instead of naming him? It's all of these sort of moments build up to sort of quite a fantastic overall story. So what a guy, and for him to leave now is kind of sad in a way. I mean, I'm 31, so how long's he been in the team? 14 years? No, 16 years. So I would have been a small boy, or a medium-sized boy anyway, when he first broke into the side. So in a way, it's all I've ever known is Stuart Broad. With Anderson, that's slightly a slightly different thing, and I think this speaks to the kind of, I guess, the dynamic of the Ashes in relation to English cricket. Now, for Stuart Broad, he said it himself, the Ashes is the pinnacle, and he wanted to go out at the pinnacle. I don't know if Anderson sees the Ashes in quite the same way. I think he sees Test cricket in general as being the pinnacle, and playing for England as the pinnacle. And the Ashes,
maybe that's because he has such a bad record in Ashes.
Well, it could be that. It could be that. But I think he sees those series as maybe not just another series, but perhaps not on the pedestal that somebody like Broad has them. And so for him, I think the pursuit of all-time greatness and Warne's record tally, and the fact that England have got 2 weakish opponents next year, and the fact that with Broad out the team, there's probably more room for him to get opportunities moving forward as well, are a bit of a carrot. Now, we don't know. He said himself that he might walk away. He wants to think about it. He doesn't feel like he wants to quit yet. But
do you think they'd pick him? Do you think they'd pick him for India? Because I think you've got a 5-test series out there in January. So would they take him?
I don't think I would to India, but I think for England next year. But I wouldn't take Wokes either to India, to be honest. I'd have obviously quite a spin-focused bowling attack. Hopefully Stokes' operation goes well, and then build a seam attack probably around Ollie Robinson with Wood, and if England are lucky, someone like Ollie Stone or Josh Tongue as the other seamers, so people who provide pace through the air, basically. So I don't actually think there's a room for a traditional English seamer in that attack, full stop. But when they play the West Indies and Sri Lanka next year, there definitely will be. And I think with Broad going, there is a vacancy in that attack that Broad was filling this summer for a senior seam bowler who can produce reliable spells. I think the question with Anderson, and really he'll be the only one that can answer this, is whether he bowled well, but he was unlucky, whether his bowling he's now too old to bowl well, or whether the pitches and the conditions and maybe the matchup against Australia didn't suit him. Now he's 41. He's been playing Test cricket for God only knows how long. I think England will trust him to know which one of those it was, whether it was maybe a conditions issue or whatever it was. If the answer comes back, if Anderson knows that he's too old, I think England will trust him to tell them that he is too old, if that makes sense.
Yeah, look, I think it was a bit of everything. I think he didn't have a lot of zip through the series, but the pitches aren't going to suit him. I mean, and I wonder what England will do next year. I mean, if they want to keep playing baseball, Gav mentioned Harry Brook before. I mean, he's not going to bat that well on a green seamer. I mean, it's a lottery. So, I personally think probably Anderson, the right time would have been this Oval Test. I think it's time to let the next generation come through, but we'll see, I guess. What did you think about the ball swap at the Oval? Now, I don't want to come across as a whinger like you lot about the best, I think. So let me make that very clear. But
you're going to?
No, but because I think Australia lost that game for a lot of other reasons. Like, I don't think we should have bowled first. I mean, you must have been like cock a hoop when come and sent you lot in. I mean, I thought that was ridiculous.
Oh, to be honest, I thought it was the right decision. I think if Australia hadn't dropped 5 catches in the first hour,
argue we don't agree on anything, Jack. It's.
I mean, I was, from an English point of view, I was pretty nervous, and I think Australia's fielding, as bad as England's was earlier in the series, that session was a travesty. You just can't do that.
No, 5 drop catches. But I think when you send a team in, and Tim Payne said this on his radio show, when you send a team in a massive game like that, you are putting more pressure on yourself. And
I think there's 2 other things. So in this case, because of Bazball, one, it means Australia don't have to deal with the tricky third innings, which I think it was a big problem for them, especially at Headingley, where they didn't really know how hard to press the accelerator, and Marnus Labuschagne gets out slog sweeping. I think it was the 3rd time he'd ever played the shot in his career. They've got data on this. And why is he doing that? He's doing that because he's worried that England have got the ability to chase a lot in the 4th innings and to do it quite quickly.
He's just trying to take Ali on. Him and Smith that day thought, we'll hit this part-time out of the attack. And
that's an element of it, but I think it's also because it's the 3rd innings, and then they're thinking about what a winning score is in a way that they probably wouldn't without England's track record looming over.
That's where I think Australia lost it, because our best cricket is put runs on the board and defend. Stark, Hazelwood, Cummins, they look up, there's big runs on the board and come at us. And, I have to say they just got rattled by Bazball.
Well, I think that's partly true, but I do understand why you would not want England batting last. I think that is a reasonable thing to plan, is to and I think the conditions, like the Oval, generally speaking, pretty easy to bowl on day 1.5. Then it gets very flat, and day 3 is normally the best batting day at the Oval, and then day 4 and 5 you see reverse seam come into the game because it gets quite abrasive, it dries out a lot. So I think that there were sort of solid reasons for that. There was another question that you asked.
I was going about the ball. But if you bowl first, though, you have to get a lead of 50 to 100 in that second. You want to be, as you say, batting on that 3rd day for a little bit where the conditions are the best. So Australia didn't play well, but I think the way the series was going, I would have just liked to have seen them go out there, back your batters to put on 350, and then see what England can do when they have to chase the game. But on the ball swap, so it's getting a bit of press here. It's getting a bit of press here, as you can imagine, because the balls that came out were completely different. I mean, it was like chalk and cheese. You had one old ratty ball that you play with at your local club on a net, and then they bring out this shiny new Duke's ball. And now the latest conspiracy theory is that someone has gone into the box and put in some of those Duke's balls from 2018 that swung around corners. And this was all engineered by England. I don't know about that, but firstly, you have to concede the balls were ridiculously different.
Well, yeah, I mean, the 2018 conspiracy theory, that sounds like a conspiracy theory to me. That's a bit QAnon for my taste. I do think that it made a difference, though, and I think that was pretty evident. I mean, like, how long did England use that ball? It was 100. It was 105 overs old theoretically. That ball wasn't 105 overs old. That ball was probably about 70 overs old.
I'm not even sure it was made of leather. I mean, I'm not even sure if it was actually just a fully registered cricket ball. But also the rain didn't help. I mean, the rain might have saved you at Old Trafford, but the rain came on the 4th day when Khawaja and Warner were batting beautifully, and on the 5th day when Head and Smith were getting going, there was that long break in the middle of the day. But that ball thing is just wild. Like, is Joe Wilson blind?
Yes, he is the answer. I mean, we've got a growing body of evidence that Joe Wilson's eyesight might not be 20/20, and I think we can probably file that under that category. Here, I mean, apparently, I think, was it Khawaja said this, that they had a look in the box and basically none of the balls were suitable, that they had to choose one that was new. So like if we're talking about whinges, I think that's a fair whinge. I think that did have an impact on the game. It is still a whinge, and ultimately ball changes happen, and sometimes they're unlucky for whichever team you face. Other points in the series, Australia got the ball swapped. I remember one pretty clearly when Zach Crawley was on 40 or 40 doing his thing, ball swap. Mitch Marsh gets him out 2 balls later.
Yeah, as I said, I don't think it's why we lost the Test match. And chasing 380, if you leave yourself that to win a series, then you're always going to be up against it. It certainly had an effect. It certainly started to move. But I think in 2019 at Edgbaston, Australia got a ball swap and the ball started swinging around corners. So you have to take the rub of the green. But Jack, bad news. I've sort of saved this to the end. Australia actually won the series 18 points to 9 points, according to the ICC Test Championship table. So whether 2-2's fair or not, we actually scored double the amount of points in the Test Championship table. And that's all due to over-rate penalties. So, yeah, how do you must be gutted to lose the series in such a manner.
It's sort of a bit nebulous, that, isn't it?
I'm talking in jest, but it's crazy, isn't it? Because
I think
the Test Championship table is craving for relevance, and I know they've got to do something about overrates, but this is not the way.
Yeah, it's completely bonkers that a series that's that close leads to such a mismatch in the number of points, and it's also sort of slightly weird that is a result basically of one of the Australian players complaining that the point system wasn't fair halfway through the series and getting it changed.
So it would have been a lot worse. We might have been minus points. We might have
both teams would have been on about 9, I think, but because England get bowled out quicker because of the way they play, Australia had some innings that didn't count against their over rate. I don't know what the point of it is, to be honest. If you're the World Test Championship and all the point system, if you're going to penalise teams so harshly, well, I will say from an English point of view, England have got to go to India and get pumped 5-0, probably maybe 4-1 if they're lucky. So realistically, I don't know if there was that much chance of them actually making the final. The World Test Championship seems to basically exist to give India a chance at winning a showpiece final, or maybe another way of putting it, give India a chance at losing a showpiece final, and perhaps also to enable another team to market themselves as the world champions. I quite like the one-off event. I will say that I like the final. I think that's a good idea, but
it shouldn't be decided on overrates.
Yeah, how we get there, I've got some big problems with. I do actually like. I really enjoyed both of them. But yeah,
I agree. It's because not everyone plays an unequal amount of games. It is hard, but basically, I think Australia was slugged 10 points. And 50% of their match fees, that's $100,000 in total for the first innings of England at Old Trafford.
That's just not right, is it?
And then England were docked 19 points for transgressions at Edgbaston, Lords, Manchester, and the Oval.
It's just like so England, it would have been 28 all, and instead it's 10-9. Is that no? Sorry,
it's 18-9. No, we thrashed you. By this table, we thrashed you. Yeah,
but that's still so. Both the two teams have lost cumulatively 29 points there, which is more than they actually have on the board between them now. Like that's farcical, basically. Especially when you consider that we're playing in a part of the world where seam bowling does dominate and seam bowling takes longer to get through. So automatically, if you're Bangladesh, you're more likely to register World Test Championship points because you bowl 70 overs of spin per new ball. I thought
it was a bit slow though.
Don't get me wrong. I think they should speed it up, but I don't think the way to do that is to retrospectively hand out these punishments that then compromise the World Test Championship as a product overall.
The best way English is like floggings or lashings, isn't that what the English like?
Well, yeah. I don't think we moved on from that a little bit, and now it's sort of like Daily Mail stings and public shamings in the Sun. That's kind of what we're into these days. I think the best way to do this, on a serious note, is a pitch clock or a bowling clock. They've brought it in baseball. It's been fantastic. It's knocked. So baseball games, if you don't know this, they were up to about 3 hours 10 minutes per game. They're now down to 2.5 hours. It's knocked half an hour off the time of a game, and it's all wasted time that's gone as well. It's people adjusting their gloves and stuff like that. So you just say once the ball hits the keeper's gloves, you've got 20 seconds before the bowler has to be at the top of their mark and ready to go, and the batter must be ready to face. If they're not, it's a no ball, or the batter gets fined 5 runs. And in one test match, the whole thing would be solved.
Yeah, I'm a big baseball
First
fan.
one would be carnage. Yeah, but
Yes.
then it would be fine.
Yeah, no, I agree. Pitch clock is the way to go. Well, I mean, it was a great series, Jack. It was it was a great series. I mean, I got to say, the English drove me mad during the series. They're really like the whinging after the Bairstow and the moral stuff being played off.
You know that is a joke, though. That the moral ashes in particular, that's like a pan-national joke by English people on the rest of the world. Apart from maybe Piers Morgan and Michael
It's not
Vaughan.
funny though.
Apart from those two people, everybody else is only bringing up things like the moral ashes to get a reaction. Like it's baiting. Yeah. No, we know it worked. That's why we keep bringing it up.
But we won the moral ashes. That's the thing, because morally England were disgraceful off the field. Like as people, they were really bad.
This is the problem. As soon as you say that, it then becomes very funny for me to say, no, England won the moral ashes and list off a load of bad things, like the stolen haircut and all of that nonsense. Start throwing accusations out like that, and the whole thing rumbles on.
Can I tell you, Jack? Carey is the nicest guy. Like
I've heard,
I've commentated on a couple of games and chatted with him a few times, and he's the most lovely guy. I mean, I feel so bad for him because he just, I'm like, I don't mind a bit of hate, whereas he would just be like, he would just not know how to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was sort of evident in some of his performances after he started copying it quite badly, and I think there was as we said, I think people were over the line there, but I
don't blame you for your whole country's behavior. It's all right. I don't blame you.
It was sort of interesting how quickly things did go downhill, and how the self-image of the Australian team being questioned actually had a material impact on the performance of the team. It was unusual to see an Australian team. Normally, the normal narrative of an Ashes is that England are the team that are a bit flaky, and that Australia are the headstrong guys that believe in what they're doing, have conviction about the way they're playing the game, and don't really care about outside noise. It's for the roles to be virtually entirely reversed in this series was an interesting and sort of slightly less talked about narrative, I think, probably because the cricket was so good. But
I think Australia just. So I don't think the Bairstow thing was what put Australia on a downhill slump. I mean, as I said, I think they got defensive when they went 2-0 up and thought we can hold this and we can probably sneak another win. And once you start thinking like that, you absolutely stuffed. And Woakes coming in was a great addition. I mean, I think he did more than Wood, because he just he took 19 wickets at 18 in 3 matches. I mean, it's unbelievable. So that, and I guess what I'd been saying for a while was that I thought Cummins and McDonald tactically are a bit lacking, but I thought stupidly that that after the World Test Championship they would get their shit together. But I sort of think Cummins, too much is being put on his shoulders, and they got the tactics wrong. And that's what surprised me. Anything surprise you about the series?
Anything surprise? I mean, yeah, a lot is the answer.
Give me a couple. Not a Gav answer, but just a.
I'm surprised at how well Bazball worked against Australia's 3rd and 4th best bowlers and 5th best bowler in virtually every game. When Lyon and Cummins weren't bowling in the first 2 Test matches, it was carnage. And then when Cummins and Stark weren't bowling in Tests 3, 4, and 5, it was an absolute domination. And I think the most surprising thing of all, and it's wrapped up in the same point, so don't worry, I'm not going to go on, is Zach Crawley's performance. That is incredible. That's one of the most remarkable turns of events that I can recall in Test cricket. This is a guy who's historically bad. You can make a solid argument the worst opener to ever have got sort of more than 15 matches in Test cricket, and he walks out of the series as nailed on one of the best 11, probably one of the best 5 players in terms of contribution. So I think that's a great story and something I just did not expect. I didn't expect it after the first test, after the first two tests. So for what happened to happen, good for him, to be honest. He's had to take a lot of stick, and to come back like that will make him very, very happy, I imagine.
Yeah, he's a great player to watch. And you know, it's a bit sort of like, so he was the leading run scorer for England. Khawaja for Australia, 496 runs. He was dropped on the last Ashes tour. I think he was averaging under 20 in English conditions. So he really turned it around. I thought he had a brilliant series. With the ball, leading wicket taker for Australia, Mitchell Starc, 23 wickets. This is what's amazing. His strike rate at 33, which I think is as advertised. He gives away a few runs, but he takes wickets. And then Stuart Broad, 22 wickets for England. Great stuff. All right, Jack, last thing to wrap this up. I guess give me favorite memories of the series, when you're relaxing back with a cup of tea, what will you remember fondly?
Oh, so I think two things. So obviously the Broad send-off, crowd going wild, all of that. That will be, I think, the iconic image of this series. And it deserves to be, because it was. The thing that I think will stick with me the longest, though, is back when the series was still alive. It's the chase, the Headingley chase, when every time England looked to get into a position where it was just about to become a formality, Australia would take a wicket or two wickets and drag it back, and then it ends up with Wokes and Wood putting on a little partnership of a couple of sixes, and England win that. And I think that moment will probably stick with me. One, because of the tension and how great it is when you get a run chase like that in Test cricket, where effectively the draw, the win, and the tie are all genuine possibilities. But two, at that moment, it really felt like the 3-2 either way was a possibility, and it seemed like, it's easy to say that. Well, no, it seemed like at that moment that it was almost inevitable that England would win the next match, and then we would have this showdown. As it turned out, the rain sort of ruined things, and that's a bit of a shame. But as two passages of play, I think those two moments, in terms of off the field stuff, the furore around the Alex Carey haircut was absolutely fantastic, and the kind of the way that blew up. Which was just an innocent mistake from Alistair Cook. He basically, speaking to somebody who didn't know any of the Australian players, tried to figure out which player it was that hadn't played and came to the wrong conclusion. It was as simple as that. Said it on air, and it blew up. Yeah, so those three moments, probably with Broad top.
Love it. I've got a few. So my favourite moment, I think, was the run chase at Edgbaston. After the scars of 2005, just to see Australia get over the line when it looked like the game had got away from us. And that was a magic reaction, up till 4 a.m, seeing Alistair Cook crying in the BBC box when his team lost. The win at Lords, but more, my memories of Lords is the lunchtime. So on that last day when the Bairstow stumping had happened, the footage was coming out of all these members like throwing darts at the Aussies and getting their swords out and their pistols, and it was all getting very nasty. And then so that whole period, and then the 2 days after Lords, I just walked around in a red mist. I was so angry at the English for the way they'd carried on. So, and then I guess my two last memories. Mitch Marsh Ton I just loved because he's a great guy, and that was a fantastic century. I know it was in a losing cause, but you have to say that was some of the best Australian batting we saw all series. But my favourite bit at the end was Broad swapping the bails on Marnus and getting him out, because some of my co-hosts and other people have said they didn't like it, but I actually think that's really funny. Like, if you're a batsman and you let that annoy you, then you've lost the war. Like and then when he did it at the end and he got Murphy out, and then I just thought that was brilliant. So yeah, Broad swapping the bails, great memory.
That was fantastic. And the Murphy swap as well. He thought that was going to be his last ball in Test cricket. Did you hear that over in Oz? Yeah. So he'd been told that Wood was going to come on for the next over, so he thought he'd do it basically as a joke. Gets the wicket, gets another over, and the rest, as I say, is history.
Indeed. Well, Jack, thank you so much for joining me on Cricket Unfiltered. So where can the listeners find the Cricket Podcast, apart from just Googling the Cricket Podcast?
I mean, that is probably the best way to find it. Or actually, maybe to be more specific, go to wherever you listen to podcasts, search the Cricket Podcast. The logo is blue. It's a set of cricket pans with the Cricket Podcast written on. You can't miss it. We've done 428 shows now, so maybe not quite as many as you, but a fair number on the board. And you can go back. Well, it's topical, so you probably want to tune into the next one when we drop it sometime this week.
Yeah, what's happening for you guys? What are you covering? What's on the horizon? A lot of chat about the 100.
I think we'll probably do a little bit of 100 stuff. It's actually started reasonably well this year. Last year in the 100, I think there were 2 close games on the men's side, and this year they've started with 1 rain off and 4 matches that have pretty much gone to the last 2 balls.
All we've heard about is Chris Hughes, this presenter.
Oh my goodness!
Does he work for the BBC?
And I think he's like, yeah. Go on, explain it. Yeah,
he starts off with Maitland Brown, who's a friend of the show. She's been on here, and I'll give him his due. He didn't bring up Barbie. She brought up that she'd seen Barbie, and he goes something like, "Oh, aren't you a little Barbie with your blue eyes?" And then she sort of giggled, and he then made it worse by saying, "Oh, look, she's blushing," or something. Yeah. And then the next 2 nights later, he has Jason Roy there, and he goes, "Oh, you must be knackered after finishing the Ashes," and you're thinking that's weird. And then he goes, "I was nice talking to Joe Root at the end," and you're like, "Okay, that's Jason Roy." I mean, what a shocker.
Yeah. I mean, Jason Royal also managed to slip an F-bomb into that interview as well. So it's not been a good couple of days for Chris Hughes. That's what happens, though, when you employ somebody from Love Island to be your cricket anchor. So they've only got themselves to blame, the BBC, on that. But I can see why that will travel the best. To some extent, unless the T20 comp's happening in your neck of the woods or it's the IPL, they're all sort of the same, and you might tune in if you've got a little bit of time, but you're probably not going to be following any of the subplots or know what the table is. And so I wouldn't begrudge anyone in Oz or anywhere else in the world for not knowing what's going on there. But we'll talk about that a little bit. But
we get it here. We get it on our Fox. We get the 100, so we get all the games, and we get the Canadian Global T20, and we've just got Major League Cricket. So
that's it.
You're going to be talking about that. Good.
Maybe a bit of West Indies, India as well. We'll see.
Lovely. Well, Jack, thanks for joining me. Listeners, thanks everybody. Later this week, I'm dropping an interview with Kumar Sangakkara, so listen out for that.